A fashion model's descent. I used to be a model in the early 1990s, a time when supermodels like Cindy Crawford and Stephanie Seymour ruled the fashion industry. I worked for famous designers like Jean-Paul Gaultier and Galliano, and I was lucky enough to experience all the amazing perks of possessing extreme physical beauty. But I quickly realized that most of the people I interacted with in the fashion industry lacked any emotional depth or the ability to look beyond the superficial. It was a world where looks were everything, and your worth was measured by your appearance. I had smoked some marijuana in my teens, but was never heavily into drugs or alcohol before I entered the modeling industry. However, conforming was necessary to feel like I was part of the fashion scene at the time, and I gave in to peer pressure regarding drugs and alcohol. Heroin chic was beginning to take hold, but it still wasn't mainstream when I was still professionally active. I preferred stimulants and initially gravitated towards cocaine, but then I started using methamphetamine to stay up for longer periods and maintain my weight with little to no effort. My drug habit quickly evolved into a full-blown addiction, and my last photo shoot was a disaster. I could barely stand, and the blisters on my skin, especially on my back, were so bad that makeup couldn't adequately cover them up. My teeth started to rot until I lost most of them, and I lost my modeling contract and most of my friends. My family initially tried to help me by arranging an intervention and sending me to rehab, but I inevitably returned to meth with even greater intensity. It wasn't until the day I mutilated myself forever that I realized how much I had lost. I tried to overdose, but I ended up spilling most of the meth on the soiled carpet in my drug den apartment. I started to feel a deep itch in my right cheek that I started to scratch but could not relieve. The itch gradually spread to most of my face, and I started to claw at my face, believing that something had to be removed underneath my skin. I grabbed scissors and started to cut pieces of flesh from my own face in an effort to deal with the overwhelming itch. I didn't feel any pain beyond the itch and didn't realize the extent of the damage until I looked at myself in the mirror and saw that at least half of the skin had been removed, leaving mangled pieces of flesh, blood, and exposed muscle and teeth where skin had formerly been. A roommate found me passed out in the bathroom later that day and called the EMS. I was treated with skin grafts, reconstructive surgery, and sent for an involuntary mental evaluation in a mental hospital. It was a wake-up call for me, and I realized how much I had lost to my addiction. Now I'm drug-free, and I work as an addiction specialist at a rehab facility, helping others who struggle with addiction. It's a humbling experience, and I'm grateful for the second chance that I've been given. Looking back, I realize that the fashion industry is a world where it's easy to lose yourself, and I lost myself in drugs and addiction. But the experience taught me that true beauty comes from within, and it's important to focus on what really matters in life: relationships, personal growth, and inner happiness. As I reflect on my past, I can't help but laugh at the irony of it all. I was a fashion model whose beauty was once prized above all else, and now I work as an addiction specialist, where my looks don't matter at all. It's a funny but important lesson, and one that I'm grateful to have learned. Family annihilation. I can still remember the events of that night in October 1997 like it was yesterday. I was a 39-year-old married father of 2 children, and I had finally reached my breaking point. For months I had been struggling with suicidal thoughts, wishing for an escape from my miserable life. I had been trying to find the courage to take my own life, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I was so filled with despair, so consumed by the darkness that surrounded me, that the thought of leaving this world alone was unbearable. So I decided to take my family with me. I felt like if I could bring them along with me into death, I would not be alone. I would have them by my side, and I would be able to take comfort in that. It was 4 a.m. when I finally gathered the strength to carry out my plan. I silently crept around the house, gathering the items I would need. I had chosen a large serrated hunting knife, and I had also filled a bucket with gasoline. I made my way upstairs, where my wife and children were sleeping, and I slowly and carefully opened their bedroom door. I started with my wife, stabbing her in the chest with the hunting knife and putting a pillow over her mouth to muffle her screams. I then turned to my children, one of whom had woken up during the commotion. I slammed the knife into the center of their face as hard as I could, and then I chased the other one through the house, stabbing them repeatedly. When I was finished, I arranged the bodies on a single bed and doused them heavily with the gasoline I had brought. I lit the bed on fire, and then I sat back and watched as the flames consumed my family. I had intended to take my own life by inhaling the smoke, but after a few moments, I could not take it anymore, and I ran away. It has been over 20 years since that night, and yet I'm still amazed that I have not been caught. I have since remarried, and my new wife is pregnant with our second child. But still, I cannot shake the terror of that night, and I realize that I will never truly be able to escape from what I have done. Cave of Demonic Cries. I am a cave explorer, and my dog Goober is my trusted companion. We've been through this area countless times, but today we stumbled upon a cave I've never seen before. The entrance was hidden by a thicket of bushes and vines, but it was unmistakable. A narrow crevice in the earth, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. Despite not having all the necessary equipment for an initial cave exploration, I couldn't resist the call of the unknown. So Goober and I decided to enter the cave. As we went deeper, I couldn't help but notice the peculiar smell of the air, which was thick with dampness and must. The rocks underfoot were slimy and slick, making each step a treacherous one. The walls of the cave were uneven and jagged, creating strange shapes and shadows that seemed to dance in the dim light of my flashlight. As we went further in, I suddenly heard a faint, muffled cry, like that of a child. Goober immediately darted forward, barking and whining in excitement, and I followed behind him. But as we went deeper, the cries became more sinister, more demonic, and more intense. They echoed through the cavern, bouncing off the walls and seeming to come from every direction at once. I called out to Goober, but he was already too far ahead, and I could hear him barking frantically in the distance. I followed the sound of his voice, my heart pounding in my chest as the cries grew louder and more menacing. The passageways grew increasingly small, and at one point I found myself stuck in a narrow crevice. I could barely move, and my flashlight suddenly flickered out, leaving me in total darkness. I was left alone, deep in the cave with no way out. Panic set in as I realized the gravity of my situation. I could feel my breath growing shallow, my heart pounding in my chest. I feared I might die there horribly, either from starvation or exposure. Suddenly I heard a voice behind me, a demonic voice that seemed to be taunting me. But when I tried to turn to face it, I found I couldn't move. The voice multiplied, becoming many, and it encircled me, growing louder and more intense until I blacked out. When I came to, I was lying outside the cave entrance, my dog Goober licking my face. The sun was blinding me, and for a moment I couldn't believe I had made it out alive. But as I stumbled to my feet, I realized the cave entrance was nothing more than a pile of rocks, as if it had never existed at all. To this day, I cannot say for sure what happened in that cave. I've questioned whether it was some kind of hallucination or dream that resulted from a physical condition. But my desire to return to the cave is intense and unrelenting. I hope to find the entrance again so I can gain a deeper understanding of what happened and what force lies within it. The abyss within her eyes. I remember my first month on the job as a police officer vividly. I had seen some horrific things, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to witness on the evening of July 17, 2008. I was on patrol in a peaceful, affluent part of the city when I got a call from dispatch about a domestic dispute a couple of blocks away. I didn't think much of it at the time, but as a rookie, I knew that domestic situations were among the most dangerous. As I pulled up to the address, I saw a woman standing still in the front yard. Her face was blank, and she was glistening with what appeared to be blood and some other liquid. The front door was ajar behind her, and I knew that something was wrong. I slowly got out of the police car, never once removing my eyes from the woman. I started to ask her if anything was wrong when she pulled up a lighter, lit it, and went up in a large, human-shaped fireball. I was frozen in shock, unable to believe what I was witnessing. The surrealness of the scene was beyond anything I could comprehend, despite having seen similar situations in movies and television shows. The brutality of the act of self-immolation was horror on a level that few people ever experience, and I was paralyzed by its spectacle. It took me a moment to snap out of my shock, but I immediately went for the fire extinguisher in the trunk of the police car and did my best to put out the fire on the woman and the trail of flames that led back into the house. Backup police showed up along with the EMS, and we were able to get the woman onto a gurney and into the ambulance. She was still moving, her body charred and mutilated. As the other first responders and I went into the house, we discovered the battered corpses of the woman's 3 children. They had apparently been beaten to death with an aluminum bat that was lying next to them in the kitchen. It was a horrific scene, one that has haunted me ever since. I later learned that the father of the children had died after a long, drawn-out illness just a year before the incident. The mother had descended into a psychotic depression that had worsened since. The house was being foreclosed on, and the medical bills for the deceased father were overwhelming. The pressure that the woman was under was exceptional, but it certainly did not excuse the choices she had made that day. What haunts me the most about this call is the look on the woman's face as I pulled up to the house. It was like an abyss that was beyond good and evil. It was somehow beyond morality and civilization. This incident destroyed a piece of my humanity and forced me to build an emotional wall between me and the things that I am forced to witness as a member of law enforcement. As I reflect on this call, I realize that no one is immune to the pressures of life. We all face our own struggles, and it's important to reach out for help when we need it. It's also important to remember that our choices have consequences and that we need to take responsibility for our actions. This incident taught me the importance of empathy, both for others and for myself. It also taught me that even the most peaceful of neighborhoods can be hiding dark secrets. As a police officer, I have learned to approach every situation with caution and compassion, knowing that the next call could change my life forever.